The October afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen windows of our modest two-story home in Cedar Falls, Iowa, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The smell of apple cinnamon candles mixed with the lingering aroma of the meatloaf I'd prepared for dinner, creating that comfortable, lived-in atmosphere that had become our family signature. "Mom, I have something to tell you," my 12-year-old daughter Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hands. I looked up from where I was washing dishes, noting the nervous energy radiating from her small frame. Emma had always been my quiet one, the child who preferred books to playground games, who found comfort in the corner of the library rather than the center of attention. Her auburn hair fell in gentle waves around her face, partially hiding the constellation of freckles that dotted her cheeks. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, drying my hands on the dish towel that read, "Home is where the heart is," a Mother's Day gift from 3 years ago that had seen better days. Emma unfolded the paper with deliberate care, as if it contained state secrets. "There's a talent show at school next month, for the fall festival." She paused, taking a deep breath that seemed to require all her courage. "I want to sign up." The words hung in the air like morning fog over the Iowa cornfields. I felt my eyebrows rise involuntarily, not from disapproval, but from surprise. Emma had never shown interest in performing. She was the child who hid behind my legs during family gatherings, who whispered her order to waitresses, who turned beet red when called upon in class. "A talent show?" I repeated, setting down the dish towel and giving her my full attention. "What would you like to perform?" Her green eyes, so much like her father's, lit up with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Singing. I want to sing." The kitchen door swung open with its familiar squeak, and my sister Margaret entered like a force of nature. At 38, 2 years my senior, Margaret had always carried herself with a confidence that seemed to skip me in the genetic lottery. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the Iowa humidity, and her real estate agent blazer looked fresh even at the end of a long workday. "What's all this about singing?" Margaret asked, catching the tail end of our conversation as she set her designer purse on the kitchen counter. She'd been stopping by more frequently since my divorce 6 months ago, partly out of sisterly concern, partly because she couldn't resist weighing in on my parenting decisions. "Emma wants to enter the school talent show," I explained, watching as my daughter's posture immediately shifted, her shoulders hunching slightly inward. Margaret's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "Emma? Our Emma." She looked at my daughter with the same expression she might reserve for someone who'd announced their intention to swim to Australia. "Honey, you know I love you, but you've never even sung happy birthday without turning red as a tomato." I felt a protective instinct flare in my chest, but before I could speak, Emma's voice filled the kitchen. Not the whispered tone we were accustomed to, but something stronger, more determined. "I know I'm quiet, Aunt Margaret, but I can sing. I practice in my room every night." Margaret's laugh wasn't cruel, but it carried that particular brand of well-intentioned dismissiveness that can cut deeper than outright meanness. "Oh, sweetheart, practicing in your bedroom is very different from performing in front of hundreds of people. The middle school talent show draws the entire community, parents, grandparents, the high school kids who come to watch. It's not exactly a forgiving audience." The color drained from Emma's face, but she stood her ground. "I want to try." "Margaret," I began, my voice carrying a warning edge that my sister knew well from our childhood disputes. But Margaret was on a roll now, in full protective aunt mode mixed with her natural tendency to manage situations. "I'm just being realistic, Sarah. You remember what happened to the Johnson boy 2 years ago when he tried that magic act? Poor kid forgot half his tricks and spent 5 minutes trying to pull a rabbit out of an empty hat while 300 people watched in awkward silence. Do we really want to put Emma through that kind of potential humiliation? The word humiliation hit Emma like a physical blow. I could see her retreat into herself, the spark of excitement dimming in her eyes like someone had turned down the lights. "She hasn't even auditioned for me yet," I said firmly, moving closer to Emma and placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Maybe we should hear what she's been practicing before we make any decisions." Margaret glanced at her watch, a habit she developed that always made conversations feel rushed and slightly less important than her next appointment. "Look, I have a showing in 20 minutes, but I just think we need to be realistic about Emma's temperament. She's a wonderful kid, don't get me wrong, but she's always been more of a behind-the-scenes type. There's nothing wrong with that. The world needs people who work better away from the spotlight." Emma's grip on the talent show flyer tightened, creating new wrinkles in the paper. Can I just think about it?" she asked, her voice returning to its familiar whisper. My heart broke a little at the defeat in her tone. "Of course you can, baby. You don't have to decide anything right now." Margaret gathered her purse and headed toward the door, pausing to ruffle Emma's hair in what she probably thought was an encouraging gesture. "You know, I just want what's best for you, right, Em? Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is protect the people we love from situations that might hurt them." After Margaret left, the kitchen felt unnaturally quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of our neighbor, Mr. Peterson, mowing his lawn. Emma still stood in the same spot, staring down at the crumpled flyer in her hands. "Mom," she said finally, her voice so soft I had to lean closer to hear her. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think Aunt Margaret is right about me embarrassing myself?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I knelt down so we were eye level, taking her small hands in mine. They were cold despite the warmth of the kitchen, and I could feel a slight tremor running through her fingers. "Emma, look at me," I said gently. When her green eyes met mine, I saw so much more than the shy little girl everyone else seemed to see. I saw determination, hope, and yes, fear, but the kind of fear that comes with wanting something badly enough to risk everything for it. "I think," I said carefully, choosing my words like I was defusing a bomb, "that your Aunt Margaret loves you very much and wants to protect you. But I also think that sometimes the most important things we do in life are scary. And sometimes the people who love us most can't always see what we're capable of." Emma's eyes searched my face. But what if she's right? What if I do embarrass myself? I thought about all the times in my own life when I'd let fear make my decisions for me. The college scholarship I'd turned down because I was afraid I wasn't smart enough. The job promotion I'd never applied for because I was convinced I'd fail. The small compromises that had accumulated over the years until I'd somehow become a smaller version of myself. You know what, Em? Maybe you will be nervous. Maybe your voice will shake a little, or maybe you'll forget a word or two. But that's not the same thing as embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing yourself would be giving up on something important to you because someone else was afraid you might fail. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Outside, the October wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the oak tree that had stood in our backyard since before I was born. The sound was like whispered encouragement, or maybe that was just my imagination. "Will you listen to me practice?" she asked suddenly, the flyer crinkling as she smoothed it out against her jeans. "I would love nothing more," I said, meaning every word. As we headed upstairs to her bedroom, I caught a glimpse of us in the hallway mirror, mother and daughter, both a little scared, both a little brave, about to discover something we'd never known was there all along. Emma's bedroom was exactly what you'd expect from a 12-year-old who preferred books to social media. The walls were covered with posters of Broadway musicals, Hamilton, The Greatest Showman, Dear Evan Hansen. alongside bookshelves crammed with everything from Harry Potter to poetry collections she discovered at the local library. Her desk was organized with the precision of someone who found comfort in order, and her bed was made with hospital corners that would make a drill sergeant proud. "I usually practice when you're at work," Emma admitted, settling cross-legged on her bed while I took the desk chair. "Or when you're downstairs making dinner. I didn't want anyone to hear me until I was ready." The afternoon sun slanted through her gauze curtains, casting everything in a golden, dreamlike glow. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of our neighborhood settling into evening. Car doors slamming as parents returned from work, children's voices calling out in the distance, the eternal background hum of life continuing its daily rhythm. "What song were you thinking of performing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. Emma reached under her bed and pulled out a worn notebook, its edges soft from handling. "I've been working on Fight Song by Rachel Platten. I know it's kind of old now, but—" She paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. "The words mean something to me." I nodded, recognizing the song. It had been popular a few years back, one of those anthems about finding strength when everything seems impossible. The irony wasn't lost on me that my quiet daughter had chosen a song about finding her voice. "I've been watching YouTube tutorials about breathing and projection," she continued, her confidence growing as she talked about something she'd clearly spent considerable time thinking about. "Mrs. Henderson in choir class says I have good pitch, but I've never sung solo before, just in the group." She opened her notebook, and I could see pages covered with lyrics written in her careful handwriting, along with notes in the margins about breathing techniques and emotional emphasis. This wasn't a whim or a passing fancy. She'd been preparing for this with the methodical dedication she brought to everything that mattered to her. "I'm ready to try," she said, closing the notebook and standing up. "But can you promise not to interrupt, even if it's not good? I just need to get through it once without stopping." The vulnerability in her request nearly broke my heart. "I promise, sweetheart. Just sing." Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath that seemed to come from her toes, and opened her mouth. What happened next changed everything. The voice that filled her small bedroom wasn't the tentative whisper I'd expected. It wasn't perfect. There was a slight tremor in the beginning, a breath taken a beat too early in the second verse. But it was real, and it was powerful, and it was absolutely, undeniably beautiful. Like a small boat on the ocean, sending big waves into motion. Her voice carried a richness I'd never heard before, not just in Emma, but in anyone outside of professional recordings. It had texture and depth, with an emotional resonance that seemed impossible from someone so young. As she moved through the verses, her confidence grew, and with it, her voice opened up like a flower blooming in fast forward. "This is my fight song, take back my life song, prove I'm a right song." I found myself holding my breath, not wanting to disturb whatever magic was happening in this ordinary bedroom on this ordinary Tuesday evening. Emma wasn't just singing the words. She was living them, every lyric infused with something personal and profound that I was only beginning to understand. When she finished, the silence that followed was the kind that feels sacred, like the moment after prayer in an empty church. Emma opened her eyes slowly, as if she was returning from somewhere far away. "Mom," she whispered, and I realized there were tears streaming down my face. "Emma," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "Baby, that was extraordinary." Her face lit up with a mixture of relief and joy. "Really? You're not just saying that because you're my mom." I stood up and crossed to where she was standing, placing my hands on her shoulders. "Emma Grace Peterson," I said, using her full name the way I did when I needed her to really hear me. "I have never lied to you, and I'm not starting now. You have a gift, a real, honest-to-God gift." The words seemed to unlock something in her. The careful posture she usually maintained, shoulders slightly hunched, head ducked as if apologizing for taking up space, straightened into something I'd never seen before. Confidence, maybe, or at least the beginnings of it. "Do you really think I should enter the talent show?" she asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Margaret, been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we should look into some nice, low-key activities for Emma instead. The community center has a book club that might be more her speed." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone I was just beginning to know. All these years, I'd been protecting the quiet child I thought I understood, never realizing that there was this whole other person inside her, waiting for permission to exist. "Yes," I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I absolutely think you should enter the talent show. But more importantly, what do you think?" Emma was quiet for a moment, and I could almost see her weighing the familiar safety of invisibility against the terrifying possibility of being truly seen. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm tired of being afraid of my own voice." The next morning, Emma walked into Jefferson Middle School with a determination I'd never seen before. The talent show sign-up sheet was posted outside the main office, and according to the email I'd received from the school, students had until Friday to register. I watched from the parking lot as she approached the sheet, her backpack squared on her shoulders like armor. Several of her classmates were clustered around the sign-up area, and I held my breath as she joined them. Madison Hayes, one of the popular 8th graders known for her Instagram-worthy lifestyle and her habit of treating middle school like her personal kingdom, was holding court near the bulletin board. "Oh, look who's interested in the talent show," Madison said, her voice carrying that particular brand of teenage cruelty that's designed to sound casual while cutting deep. "What's your talent, Emma?" "Speed reading." The group giggled, and I saw Emma's step falter for just a moment. My hand moved to the car door handle, every maternal instinct screaming at me to intervene. But then I remembered the voice I'd heard in her bedroom, the strength I'd seen in her eyes when she decided she was tired of being afraid. Emma looked directly at Madison, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "Singing." The giggling stopped. Madison's perfectly glossed lips formed a small O of surprise. "Singing," repeated Tyler Morrison, a 7th grader who'd been trying to impress Madison since the school year started. "But you never talk above a whisper." "That doesn't mean I can't sing," Emma replied, stepping past them to add her name to the list with careful, deliberate handwriting. Emma Peterson, vocal performance. As she walked back toward the school entrance, I heard Madison whisper to her friends, "This is going to be interesting," in a train wreck sort of way. That evening at dinner, Emma was quieter than usual, pushing her spaghetti around her plate without much enthusiasm. "Rough day?" I asked gently. She looked up, and I could see the doubt creeping back into her eyes. "Some kids at school. They seemed surprised that I signed up. Not in a good way." I set down my fork, giving her my full attention. "What did they say?" "Nothing mean, exactly. Just surprised, like the idea of me performing was weird or something." She paused, twirling pasta around her fork with mechanical precision. Maybe Aunt Margaret was right. Maybe I should stick to things I'm good at. "And what things are you good at?" I asked. She shrugged. "Reading, math, being invisible." The casual way she added that last item to the list hit me like a slap. When had my beautiful, talented daughter learned to see invisibility as a skill rather than a limitation? "Emma, can I tell you something? Something I've never told you before." She nodded, setting down her fork. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a writer. I used to write stories and poems, and I dreamed of seeing my name on book covers someday. I even wrote a whole novel when I was 15, terrible teenage fantasy stuff. But I'd worked on it for months, Emma's eyes widened. She'd never heard this story before. My English teacher, Mrs. Foster, encouraged me to submit it to a young writers' contest. The prize was a scholarship to a summer writing program and a chance to work with real published authors. I smiled at the memory. I was so excited, Em. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something special to offer the world. What happened? Emma asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew the story wouldn't have a happy ending. I told your grandmother about it, and Aunt Margaret, she was in high school then, already popular and confident in ways I never was. They both had the same reaction. What if I didn't win? What if I embarrassed myself? What if people laughed at my writing? I took a sip of water, the old regret still bitter after all these years. So I didn't submit it. I told myself I was being practical, avoiding potential humiliation. But you know what happened instead? Emma shook her head. I stopped writing. Not all at once, but gradually. Every time I had an idea, I'd hear their voices asking, "What if you're not good enough?" And eventually, I started believing that playing it safe was the same thing as being smart. I reached across the table and took her hand. I don't want that for you, sweetheart. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life wondering, what if, because you were too afraid of failing to try. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Do you ever regret it? Not submitting your story? Every day, I admitted. Not because I think I definitely would have one, but because I never gave myself the chance to find out who I could become if I stopped being afraid of my own voice. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard something that made me pause in the hallway. It was Emma's voice drifting from her room, not the tentative practice session I'd witnessed the day before, but something fuller, more confident. She was singing the same song, but there was a new strength in it, as if she was singing not just to prepare for the talent show, but to remind herself of who she was capable of being. I smiled and continued to my room, leaving her to discover the full power of her own voice in private. Some moments are too precious to interrupt, even with praise. 2 weeks before the talent show, Cedar Falls had settled into that crisp November rhythm that makes everything feel like possibility wrapped in autumn leaves. The morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and the last apple harvests, and the trees lining Maple Street had transformed into a tunnel of gold and crimson that made even ordinary trips to the grocery store feel magical. Emma had been practicing with a dedication that both impressed and worried me. Every morning before school, I'd hear her voice warming up with scales and breathing exercises she'd learned from YouTube tutorials. After homework each evening, she'd disappear into her room for what she called rehearsal time, emerging only for dinner and our mandatory 30 minutes of screen-free conversation. The change in her wasn't just about singing. She walked taller, spoke up more in our dinner conversations, and even started participating in class discussions according to her teachers. It was as if discovering her voice had awakened something that had been dormant for years. But the rest of the family wasn't quite as enthusiastic about her transformation. "She's setting herself up for disappointment," Margaret said during our weekly coffee meetup at Rosie's Diner, a local institution that had been serving the same menu and gossip for 40 years. I mean, I'm glad she's gaining confidence, but there's a difference between healthy self-esteem and delusion. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded me of storm clouds. "Have you actually heard her sing?" Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Sarah, you're her mother. Of course you think she sounds good. That's literally your job." Rosie herself, a woman in her 70s who'd been watching Cedar Falls children grow up for decades, paused in her coffee refill rounds. "Excuse me for eavesdropping, but are you talking about little Emma Peterson?" I nodded, surprised that Rosie knew Emma by name. My daughter wasn't exactly the type to make herself known around town. That girl's got something special, Rosie said with the authority of someone who'd heard every high school graduate's valedictorian speech and every church solo for 4 decades. I heard her humming while you were paying last week, and I thought there was a radio playing somewhere. When I realized it was coming from her, well... She shook her head in wonder. You don't hear a voice like that every day. Margaret looked skeptical. She was humming in here. Sweet as birdsong, but with real power underneath, Rosie confirmed, moving on to refill coffee for the farmers who gathered every morning to solve the world's problems over eggs and hash browns. After Rosie moved away, Margaret leaned forward, her expression shifting from dismissive to concerned. Look, even if she can sing, and I'm not saying she can't, performing in front of people is completely different. You remember how she used to hide behind your legs when strangers talked to her? How she'd cry if teachers called on her in class. That kind of stage fright doesn't just disappear because you can carry a tune. She wasn't wrong, and that's what made her arguments so hard to dismiss. Emma had always struggled with social anxiety. Parent-teacher conferences invariably included conversations about helping her come out of her shell and build confidence in group settings. Maybe, I said carefully, but maybe that's exactly why she needs to do this. Margaret sighed, the kind of dramatic exhale she'd perfected in high school drama club. I just don't want to see her get hurt. Or worse, laughed at. You know how cruel kids can be. That afternoon, I decided to pick Emma up from school instead of letting her take the bus. I wanted to see how she was handling the social pressure that came with putting herself out there. I found her in the music room with Mrs. Rodriguez, the choir director, working on breathing techniques. Through the small window in the door, I could see Emma standing with perfect posture, one hand on her chest, the other on her diaphragm, following Mrs. Rodriguez's instructions with the focused attention of a medical student. Better, Mrs. Rodriguez was saying as I entered. Remember, breath is the foundation of everything. If you can control your breathing, you can control your nerves. Mrs. Peterson. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted me warmly. She was a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of energetic personality that made middle schoolers actually want to participate in choir. I was just telling Emma that she should consider auditioning for the high school advanced choir when she gets there. We don't usually encourage 8th graders to skip levels, but her voice is really something special. Emma beamed at the praise, but I could see the familiar uncertainty creeping into her expression. I'm not in 8th grade yet. I'm only in 7th, and I've never even sung a solo before. Everyone starts somewhere, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. The important thing is that you're willing to start at all. Most people spend their whole lives keeping their best gifts hidden because they're afraid of what might happen if they share them. As we drove home, Emma was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the familiar landscape of cornfields and farmhouses that defined our corner of Iowa. Penny for your thoughts, I said, using the phrase my own mother had always used when I retreated into my own head as a child. Mrs. Rodriguez thinks I might be good enough for advanced choir in high school, Emma said slowly. But what if she's wrong? What if I'm only good enough for middle school? And when I get to high school, everyone will realize I'm not actually that talented. The question revealed so much about how Emma saw the world, always assuming that her current success was some kind of mistake that would eventually be discovered and corrected. Em, can I ask you something? When you're singing in your room, practicing for the talent show, how does it feel? She considered this carefully. Like I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. Like all the parts of me that usually feel jumbled and nervous just settle into place. That feeling, I said, that's not something that can be taken away from you. That's not dependent on other people's opinions or approval. That's yours. That evening, Margaret called during dinner. Emma answered the phone, and I could hear my sister's voice through the receiver, though not her exact words. Emma's responses were monosyllabic at first. Yes, Aunt Margaret. No, I'm not nervous. Yes, I'm still planning to do it. Then there was a longer pause, and when Emma spoke again, her voice had a firmness I'd never heard before. Aunt Margaret, I know you're worried about me, and I love that you care. But I need to do this. Not because I'm sure I'll win, or because I think I'm the best singer in the world, but because I need to know what happens when I stop hiding. After she hung up, Emma looked at me across the dinner table. Was that rude? I don't want to hurt her feelings. That wasn't rude, I assured her. That was honest. There's a difference. The weekend before the talent show, we decided to do a dress rehearsal in our living room. Emma had chosen a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and she'd been practicing her stage presence in addition to her vocal technique. Our living room wasn't much. A couch that had seen better years, a coffee table scarred from years of homework sessions, and carpet that definitely showed its age. But with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and Emma standing by the fireplace like it was her personal stage, it felt grand enough. She took her position, closed her eyes for a moment to center herself, and began to sing. If I had been impressed by her voice 2 weeks ago, I was absolutely stunned now. The practice, the coaching from Mrs. Rodriguez, and most importantly, the growing confidence she developed had transformed her performance from good to transcendent. She didn't just sing the words, she embodied them. When she reached the chorus, her voice soared with the kind of power that makes you forget you're in a suburban living room and transports you somewhere larger. Somewhere where dreams are possible and courage is just another word for love. This is my fight song, take back my life song, prove I'm alright song. As the final note faded, I realized I was crying again. But this time they weren't just tears of pride, they were tears of recognition. I was seeing my daughter not as the quiet child I'd always protected, but as the young woman she was becoming. How did that feel? I asked. Emma's smile was radiant, like flying. The next morning, Margaret appeared on our doorstep unannounced, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. I came to apologize, she said without preamble, and to ask if I could hear Emma practice, if she's comfortable with that. Emma, who'd been eating cereal at the kitchen table, looked up in surprise. You want to hear me sing? Margaret sat down across from her, setting the flowers on the table between them. I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, about needing to know what happens when you stop hiding. And I realize that I've been so focused on protecting you from potential failure that I haven't been supporting your potential success. She paused, and for a moment, she looked younger than her 38 years. I guess I've been projecting my own fears onto you. When I was your age, I tried out for the school play and forgot all my lines during the audition. I was so humiliated that I never tried out for anything again. I've been afraid you'd have the same experience. Emma considered this with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. But even if I did forget my lines or mess up somehow, that wouldn't mean I was wrong to try. Margaret's smile was soft and a little sad. No, sweetheart, it wouldn't. And I should have remembered that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the thing anyway. An hour later, Emma performed her song in our living room for an audience of 2, her mother and her aunt. When she finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Emma, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion, I owe you another apology. You're going to be absolutely magnificent. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed the way I had when she was small, she looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than her 12 years. Mom, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that this whole thing, signing up, practicing, getting ready, it's been the best thing I've ever done. Not because I think I'll win, but because I finally feel like myself. I kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the new confidence that seemed to radiate from her very skin. I'm proud of you, Em. Not because of how you sing, but because of who you're choosing to become. As I turned off her light and headed to my own room, I could hardly believe that tomorrow night my quiet daughter would stand on a stage in front of hundreds of people and share the gift she'd been hiding for so long. I fell asleep that night with a mixture of excitement and terror, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would be different. The Jefferson Middle School auditorium hummed with the electricity that only comes from hundreds of people gathered in anticipation of something special. The November evening was crisp enough to require jackets, and families filed into the building with the festive energy of a community coming together to celebrate their children's talents. I adjusted my position in the third row, right side, where I had a clear view of the stage, but close enough to offer Emma a reassuring smile when she needed it. My hands were trembling slightly, whether from nerves or excitement, I couldn't tell. Margaret sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet, clutching a program that she'd already read 3 times. "She's going to be wonderful," Margaret whispered, though I suspected she was trying to convince herself as much as she was reassuring me. The auditorium was more packed than I had expected. The fall talent show had grown into a genuine community event over the years, drawing not just parents and siblings, but grandparents, neighbors, and even some of the high school students who came to scout potential friends or, occasionally, to mock the younger kids' attempts at stardom. I spotted several familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, Dr. Martinez, who'd been Emma's pediatrician since birth, the Johnsons from down the street with their twin boys, and scattered throughout the crowd, Emma's classmates with their families. My eyes lingered on Madison Hayes, sitting in the center section with her Instagram-perfect parents, her expression one of barely contained anticipation that didn't bode well for any performer who might stumble. The stage was simple, but effective. Black curtains, professional lighting that the drama club had fundraised for last year, and a single microphone on a stand that looked both inviting and terrifying from my perspective as a parent. Principal Davidson took the stage to welcome everyone and review the evening's lineup. 22 acts in total, ranging from instrumental pieces to dance routines, magic acts to comedy skits. Emma was listed as number 18, late enough in the program that the audience would be warmed up, but early enough to avoid the restlessness that might set in toward the end. The first few performances were exactly what I'd expected from a middle school talent show, enthusiastic but unpolished. Marcus Chen played a piano piece with more passion than precision, earning warm applause from parents who'd undoubtedly heard him practice for months. The Henderson twins performed a dance routine that was energetic, if not entirely synchronized. A group of 8th grade boys did a comedy skit about homework that earned genuine laughs from their peers and indulgent chuckles from the adults. With each act, my nervous energy increased. I found myself critiquing the performances, not for their own merit, but for what they suggested about the audience's expectations and patience level. Would they be receptive to Emma's more subtle, emotional approach after watching a series of high-energy acts? "She's ready for this," Margaret said quietly as if reading my thoughts. "I can see it now. She's not the same scared little girl we've been trying to protect all these years." Act 15 was Madison Hayes herself, performing a medley of popular songs with choreography that she'd clearly spent considerable time perfecting. She was good, really good, with the kind of polished confidence that comes from years of dance classes and voice lessons. The audience responded with enthusiasm, and I felt my heart sink a little as I realized what Emma would be competing against. "Don't compare," Margaret whispered, noticing my expression. "Emma isn't trying to be Madison. She's trying to be Emma." 3 acts later, Principal Davidson announced, Next up, we have Emma Peterson performing Fight Song by Rachel Platten. The blood rushed in my ears as I watched my daughter walk onto the stage. She looked impossibly small under the bright lights, her blue dress a splash of color against the black backdrop. For a moment, she stood frozen at center stage, and I could see her scanning the audience until her eyes found mine. I gave her the thumbs up we'd practiced, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. The murmur that had been running through the audience during the brief setup time didn't completely die down. I heard whispered conversations. "That's the quiet Peterson girl, isn't it?" And I didn't even know she talked, let alone sang. Behind me, someone said, "This should be interesting," in a tone that suggested they weren't expecting to be impressed. Emma approached the microphone with the careful precision she brought to everything that mattered to her. She adjusted the height slightly, tested her distance from it with a quiet testing, and then took the deep breath that Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her to center herself. The auditorium wasn't completely quiet yet. There was still the shuffle of programs, the whispered conversations, the general restlessness that comes when a crowd is settling in for what they assume will be another pleasant but unremarkable performance by a nervous seventh grader. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, and in that instant of silence I saw something shift in her posture. The nervous girl who'd walked onto the stage disappeared, replaced by someone I was still getting to know, someone who belonged exactly where she was. When she opened her mouth and began to sing, everything changed. Like a small boat on the ocean, sending big waves into motion. The first line cut through the auditorium noise like sunlight through fog. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Programs stopped rustling. Even the teenagers who'd been surreptitiously checking their phones looked up, startled by the pure, powerful sound filling the space. But it wasn't just the technical quality of her voice that commanded attention, though that was remarkable enough. It was the emotional authenticity she brought to every word. This wasn't a 12-year-old girl performing a song she'd learned. This was a young woman sharing a piece of her soul, using someone else's words to tell her own truth. Like how a single word can make a heart open. I might only have one match, but I can make an explosion. By the second verse, you could have heard a pin drop. The auditorium had transformed from a chattering crowd into a unified audience, all of us leaning forward slightly, drawn into the magnetic field of Emma's performance. I glanced around, needing to confirm that what I was witnessing wasn't just parental bias. Margaret's mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with something approaching awe. Dr. Martinez was leaning forward in his seat, a smile of genuine surprise and delight on his face. Even Madison Hayes, who I'd expected to be critical or dismissive, was watching with what looked like respect. And all those things I didn't say, wrecking balls inside my brain. Emma's voice gained strength with each line, but it wasn't just volume, it was emotional intensity. She was singing about fighting for herself, about finding courage in the face of doubt, and everyone in that auditorium understood that she wasn't just performing these lyrics, she was living them in real time. This is my fight song. Take back my life song. Prove I'm a right song. When she reached the chorus, something magical happened. Her voice didn't just fill the auditorium, it transformed it. The space itself seemed to expand, and for a moment, we weren't in a middle school, multi-purpose room anymore. We were somewhere larger, somewhere where dreams were not just possible, but inevitable. I found myself crying, but so was half the audience. These weren't tears of pity or sympathy, but tears of recognition, the kind that come when you witness someone stepping fully into their power for the first time. My power's turned on. Starting right now, I'll be strong. I'll play my fight song. The bridge of the song built with an intensity that seemed impossible from someone so young. Emma's voice soared through the auditorium, reaching notes that would have been impressive from a trained adult. but from a seventh grader who 6 weeks ago had been afraid to speak above a whisper. They were nothing short of miraculous, but more than technical prowess. What stunned the audience was the complete transformation we were witnessing. This wasn't shy Emma Peterson anymore. This was an artist, a performer, a young woman who had found her voice in the most literal sense possible. This is my fight song, take back my life song, prove I'm alright song. As she moved into the final chorus, Emma opened her eyes and made direct contact with the audience, not scanning nervously as she had when she first took the stage, but connecting, sharing, inviting us all into this moment of triumph that we were witnessing together. The last note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, pure and strong and absolutely fearless. Then silence. For a heartbeat, maybe two, the auditorium was completely still. It was the kind of silence that follows something so unexpected, so powerful, that it takes a moment for people to process what they've just experienced. Then the applause began. It started with one person, I think it was Dr. Martinez, then spread like wildfire through the audience. But this wasn't the polite, supportive applause that had followed the other acts. This was the real thing. Surprised, delighted, genuinely moved appreciation for something extraordinary. People rose to their feet. First a few, then sections at a time, until the entire auditorium was standing and cheering for my daughter, who stood at center stage with a smile that could have powered the school for a week. The applause went on longer than any other act had received. Emma stood there, drinking it in, her posture straight and proud, no longer apologizing for taking up space but claiming it as her birthright. When it finally began to die down, she stepped closer to the microphone. "Thank you," she said, and her speaking voice carried the same new confidence as her singing voice. "Thank you so much." As she walked off stage, the audience was still buzzing with excitement. I heard fragments of conversations around me. Where did that come from? I had no idea she could sing like that. That was incredible. She should be on one of those singing shows. Margaret grabbed my arm. "Sarah, did you know? Did you know she was that good?" I shook my head, still in shock. I knew she was talented, but that... I gestured toward the stage where Emma had just redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible. That was something else entirely. The remaining acts performed gamely, but it was clear that Emma had been the evening's highlight. The audience was still energized from her performance, still buzzing with the surprise and delight of discovering hidden talent in their midst. When Principal Davidson took the stage for closing remarks, he deviated from his prepared script. "Ladies and gentlemen, in 30 years of education, I've seen a lot of talent show performances, but every once in a while, and I mean very rarely, you witness something truly special. Tonight, we all had that privilege." The applause that followed made it clear that Emma's performance had been as extraordinary for everyone else as it had been for me. After the show, we waited in the hallway outside the auditorium for Emma to emerge from the backstage area. The crowd of parents and children milled around us, and I couldn't help but notice how many people were looking our way, whispering and pointing. "Mrs. Peterson?" A woman I didn't recognize approached us. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Cedar Falls Community Theater. I wanted to talk to you about your daughter." Before I could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with Emma in tow, both of them beaming. "There she is!" Margaret exclaimed, sweeping Emma into a hug. "You were absolutely magnificent." Emma's face was flushed with excitement and accomplishment. "Did you really like it? I mean, really like it?" I said, pulling her into my own embrace. "Emma, you were extraordinary. I'm not sure, is a strong enough word for what just happened up there." More people approached, parents wanting to congratulate Emma, teachers expressing amazement, and several teenagers including, surprisingly, Madison Hayes. "Emma, Madison said, and for once, her usual air of superiority was completely absent. I just wanted to say, wow, that was really beautiful. I had no idea you could sing like that. Emma handled each interaction with grace that seemed far beyond her 12 years. She was gracious, but not self-deprecating, proud, but not boastful. It was as if performing on that stage had unlocked not just her voice, but a more confident version of herself. As we finally made our way to the parking lot, Emma walked between Margaret and me, chattering excitedly about the experience, how the lights felt, how different the microphone was from practicing at home, how amazing it felt to see the audience respond. I wasn't even nervous once I started singing, she said, her voice full of wonder. It was like all the fear just disappeared, and all that was left was the music. Margaret squeezed her hand. Emma, I owe you an apology. And a thank you. For what? Emma asked. For almost convincing you not to do this. And for reminding me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop protecting the people we love from their own potential. As we reached our car, Emma turned back toward the school building, where lights were still on and people were still filing out, still talking about what they'd witnessed. Mom, she said thoughtfully, I think I know what I want to do with my life. I followed her gaze back to the auditorium where, just an hour ago, she had transformed from the quiet girl everyone thought they knew into the artist she was meant to become. What's that, sweetheart? She smiled, and in that smile I could see not just the proud 12-year-old who had just conquered her fears, but glimpses of the confident young woman she was becoming. I want to keep using my voice, in every way that matters. As we drove home through the November night, Emma hummed softly in the back seat, not practicing anymore, but simply enjoying the sound of her own voice filling the comfortable darkness of our car. The quiet girl was gone. In her place was someone I was excited to get to know better. My daughter, the artist, the young woman who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop hiding and start singing your truth, no matter who's listening. And as we pulled into our driveway, I realized that Emma's performance hadn't just been her moment of transformation. It had been mine too. Watching her claim her space on that stage with such courage and authenticity had reminded me of my own abandoned dreams, my own silenced voice. Maybe it wasn't too late for either of us to stop playing it safe. Maybe it was time for both the Peterson women to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. After all, we just learned what was possible when you refused to let fear make your decisions for you. 6 months later, Emma auditioned for the Cedar Falls Community Theater's production of Annie and landed the title role. By the time she started high school, she was not only in advanced choir but serving as section leader for the sopranos. The quiet girl who had once hidden behind my legs was gone forever, replaced by a young woman who understood that her voice, both literally and metaphorically, was not something to be hidden, but something to be shared with the world. Margaret started taking piano lessons again, something she'd given up in college when someone told her she'd never be professional quality. I enrolled in a creative writing course at the community college, dusting off dreams I'd abandoned 20 years ago. Sometimes the most important performances happen in middle school auditoriums, witnessed by crowds who came expecting very little and left having seen something that reminded them what courage looks like when it finds its voice. Emma taught us all that the most dangerous phrase in the English language might just be "she'll embarrass herself." Not because it's always wrong, but because it assumes that avoiding embarrassment is more important than discovering what we're truly capable of when we stop letting fear choose our limitations. The hall had been silenced, all right, but what filled that silence was the sound of a young woman becoming exactly who she was meant to be, one note at a time.